Gaetz, the biggest firebrand inside of the House of Representatives.
You're not taking Matt Gaetz off the board, okay? Because Matt Gaetz is an American patriot and Matt Gaetz is an American hero.
We will not continue to allow the uniparty to run this town without a fight.
I want to thank you, Matt Gaetz, for holding the line.
Matt Gaetz is a courageous man. If we had hundreds of Matt Gaetz in D.C., the country turns around. It's that simple.
He's so tough, he's so strong, he's smart, and he loves this country. Matt Gaetz.
It is the honor of my life to fight alongside each and every one of you. We will save America. It's choose your fighter time. Send in the Firebrands. Welcome back to Firebrand. I'm Congressman Matt Gaetz. We are live broadcasting out of room 2021 of the Rayburn House Office Building in the Capitol Complex in Washington, D.C. And I hope everyone had a blessed and wonderful Thanksgiving. Is it just me, or this Thanksgiving, did everyone you know get sick? Like, I have talked to so many folks who I guess caught more than just a little bit of tryptophan at the family gathering. And so if I sound a little off today, I'm recovering from the flu, feeling better, and so grateful I've got a terrific wife, Ginger, who's been my Florence Nightingale, taking great care of me. Now we're back on the Hill, back to work, and there is a lot going on I want to chat about. We are going to get into some stuff going on around the world, in our military. But first, in our nation's capital, we are seeing a hot mess unfold. Like, Washington, D.C. has been in disarray, both on and off the Hill. And a recent piece in the Washington Examiner detailed that crime has just been out of control, a 40% increase in 2023, and the police are getting defunded. Now, the taxpayers in the district, while all this is happening, are footing the bill, you will not believe this, for a $270,000 paint job to refresh Black Lives Matter Plaza. You know, the anti-police street art that spreads across 2 blocks outside the White House and says Black Lives Matter. Now, I'm sure they had no problem finding the more than $250,000 to refresh the plaza and paint it after defunding the police. I mean, a $270,000 paint job? What are they painting Black Lives Matter in gold or cobalt or something? Breitbart News is reporting that yesterday, city officials decreased the police department's budget in Washington, D.C. In 2023 from its 2022 number. This equates to $100 million less than the 2020 budget, all while D.C. crime is spiraling out of control. There's been a 93% increase in carjackings. Just yesterday, an FBI employee was carjacked near Capitol Hill in broad daylight. And it's typically like a bunch of juvenile hoodlums. I think something like 65% of the carjackings are done by juveniles. So they know there's no consequence. They're frequently done at gunpoint. And even the FBI is getting carjacked. Earlier this year, we saw a diplomat from the United Arab Emirates and even Congressman Henry Cuellar, both carjacked. Imagine that. Someone showing up from some Middle Eastern country, and they're way less safe here. But let's not forget about the Secret Service agents. They were protecting Naomi Biden and ended up having to open fire on 3 people after their car was broken into in Georgetown. This is not like the slums of D.C. This is Georgetown, one of the nicer parts of the city. Now, after hearing all this, it's unsurprising that there's an over 30% increase in homicides in 2023 in our nation's capital. And I worry about this because one of the great joys we have in our office is inviting our constituents, making sure that they get the chance to go on the best tours and see the sites. And it's almost concerning to have people come here anymore because we've fallen into such a state of disrepair and disarray. Last week, another Breitbart News report explained that D.C. homicides have reached a 20-year high under Joe Biden's prosecutor. One of the main points made in the article is that the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, should be responsible for prosecuting and dealing with true law enforcement. But instead, he's only prosecuting about 56% of the people arrested in 2023. Crime is a symptom of Democrat control. And our nation's capital is important. It is emblematic. It is named after George Washington. If we can't keep this place safe, what does it say about the rest of the country? But it is a lesson, because Washington, D.C. has been governed by a bunch of these woke Democrats. They were gonna end the school to prison pipeline. They were gonna stop the racist cops from policing. And the result is that people of all color and kind are less safe and more susceptible to this type of disruption and harm, true harm. We got to get it under control. And most importantly, we have to stop it from metastasizing and spreading. Now, from our nation's capital, we'll be taking a trip around the world in our next segment.
Around the world.
Across the Western Hemisphere, a new world order is arising. But unlike the post-World War globalist agenda that the world has been suffering under since the mid-20th century, this is a new agenda. It is organic, nationalist, and populist in nature. This movement is driven by the people of their respective nations against global elites and the slaves of the status quo who have betrayed their own people for too long. First, we had Brexit. That shocked the world. No one believed Brexit was going to be successful, but it was the spark of a global populist nationalist movement. And right on the heels of that, the election of Donald Trump in 2016. It sent shockwaves everywhere. For Americans, Donald Trump was the embodiment of the anti-establishment, anti-globalist sentiment, a living indictment of the ruling class and a repudiation of the status quo. But for the international community, the election of Trump was this terrifying fluke that pierced the veil of a seemingly untouchable cabal of power that has ruled unchallenged since the Cold War. For some, an inspiration, a tangible victory that signaled a new consensus, an indication that the globalist facade was starting to crack. Over the past 7 years, we've seen victories by populist figures across Europe and the Americas, and so far, they only seem to be picking up steam and growing in number. Even in the face of concentrated, powerful, entrenched opposition, we see these populist movements succeeding. But because they are organic, they are not identical. The qualms expressed by various groups of people in different countries around the world do differ from nation to nation. But one thing is clear: people have had enough of politicians, bureaucrats, and globalists who have forsaken their own people and the interests of their constituencies. In 2019, Brazil elected President Jair Bolsonaro in a sweeping popular revolution. Brazilians were tired of endemic political corruption, mass violence, and poor economic outcomes. Bolsonaro delivered for Brazil, but in doing so, he ticked off everyone in the entrenched corrupt power structures. They owned the courts and the urban federal districts, and ultimately Bolsonaro lost a narrow but deeply concerning and possibly corrupt election, maybe one of the most concerning in modern history. Since then, he's faced persecution, and for the people in Brazil, life hasn't gotten better. Corruption and crime have returned, but something tells me it's not over yet. Popular movements are not so easily defeated. The fire that has been lit continues to burn in South America, and it has ignited an explosion of victories in El Salvador and Argentina. President Nayib Bukele was elected in a landslide in El Salvador, and following through on his campaign promises, he has really done a lot to endeavor on reversing that nation's decline. El Salvador was a poor, corrupt, and frankly, extremely violent nation, a failed state ruled by MS-13 more than the government itself. Drug cartels were the law and order in El Salvador. It's one of the reasons why people were leaving there in droves. Now, the gangsters are getting thrown in prison, and Bukele has opened his country up to foreign investment and economic prosperity. He has shown the world that decline is a choice, and the only reason crime is allowed to persist is because weak leaders refuse to do what is necessary. He's put the interests of law-abiding citizens first and seen to it that they are not forced to live in anarcho-tyranny. Now, why does that matter to us? Well, our theory of the case, right, as populist nationalists, is that if America is the best version of herself, then we don't have to buy into all this globalist nonsense, because we can, through inspiration, get other nations to be the best versions of themselves. And then rather than all of us surrendering our autonomy and our self-determination to some globalist entity, whatever it is, we have the opportunity to have strong nations, strong borders, strong laws, safer streets, safer people, and then you don't get these mass migrations. What the narcos and cartels want, they want the diminution of borders. They want the erosion of the nation state, because that's what creates the most permissible environment for their malign activity. Now, on the back of these victories, Argentina too has entered the fold. Once considered the Paris of the West, Buenos Aires and the rest of Argentina has really suffered from hyperinflation. It's the socialist economic policies that have brought it to bear. You've seen bureaucratic bloat, and those things have turned Argentina into a husk of its former self. Crime and third world migration have spurred other populist movements as well. Socialism, high taxes, out of control government spending, and the redistribution of wealth eventually takes its toll on a populace and always leads to the very corruption that then in turn spurs the productive, positive economic nationalism that can allow people to live better lives. When wages are stagnant and buying power is declining by the week, you can bet that a regime's days are numbered. And, in Argentina, they were. Javier Milei, an economic, I would say, eccentric individual, was elected president of Argentina in a convincing victory this past month. He was elected after a campaign of promises to absolutely rip out the bureaucracy and replace it with nothing. He called collectivists shit leftists and leftards and promised not to give them an inch. Argentina is set for one hell of a ride, and I'm bullish on their prospects for the future. But it's not just here on our side of the Atlantic Ocean. Europe also is gaining ground. In Italy, we saw various populist factions take control of the parliament. From Salvini to Meloni, Italians have enjoyed a string of victories spurred by opposition to mass migration from African and Middle Eastern countries. Migrants are committing violent crimes at a rate not seen outside the third world. Italians are starting to notice and vote accordingly. And I can't even believe we've reached this point, but like the chief globalist advocate in all of Europe is even having to concede to the power of our movement and the strength of our argument. Emmanuel Macron and France, even they are taking tougher stances on migration and immigration as the situation becomes more dire for the French, for the people in their country. Now, larger victories in Sweden and the Netherlands have occurred recently as well, proving that there's something really possible here to build on. Europeans do not want this mass migration. We also saw Wilders' party in the Netherlands. They swept the parliamentary elections, and they're poised to elect him as prime minister. He's been ahead of his time and has taken a lot of heat from the media for his stance on Islam. These Western countries enjoyed low crime and high trust until they surrendered to the globalist regimes and decided to flood their countries with foreigners. Now, Sweden and the Netherlands have these terrible endemics of rape and robbery and assaults committed by hordes of migrants brought from the most primitive areas of the world, thousands of miles away. For what reason? Nobody knows. There is not even a remotely coherent argument that this migration benefits the host nation. Presumably, this is occurring because the global left hates its own people and wishes their demise. No one voted for this. No one voted for their own replacement and displacement. Now, ignited by different flames, each of these cases, each of these cases is part of this greater general rejection of the powers that be. The global elites and the politicians that serve them, these powers have rejected what their people need and want, and they have ushered in an era of unprecedented decline. whether it's the demand for economic prosperity or the rejection of open borders or the demand for a return to law and order. People across the entire world are standing up for themselves and their nation and their people and their future. At times it feels overwhelming, like we're moving at a snail's pace. But in less than a decade's time, these victories have shown us that we are still in the fight. And you know what? There may be a better future for all of mankind as a result. Every year, we're gaining ground, and every year we're closer to building a new world order. Not a world order beholden to the nefarious and entrenched interests or antiquated and failed worldviews, but a world beholden to the will of the people within the nation states. A world full of nation states that are a lot stronger, where the nuclear family and faith and the rule of law and economic freedom, self-determination, cultural supremacy, and other foundations of civilization will be strengthened rather than undermined. Now, one of the worst of these globalist entities is, of course, the UN. And we've got a report from the Daily Mail I want to bring to your attention. United Nations set to call on Americans to stop eating meat. Stop eating meat. Put down that cheeseburger, America, in an effort to tackle climate change, despite only making up 1.4% of global emissions. And this is the Daily Mail piece. A United Nations agency is expected to call on Western countries, including the U.S., to drastically reduce meat consumption to combat climate change. This is the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. The agency will call upon nations that overconsume meat to limit consumption to reduce greenhouse emissions. I wonder what their definition of overconsumption of meat is. Like, is that a filet mignon at dinner? Is that like can you have the single patty cheeseburger, but not the double patty or triple patty cheeseburger, according to the UN? Or like if you have the meat taco, does that count? Because it's only a little bit of meat, and then you got your lettuce and tomato. It's craziness. Now, the agency that is doing this, I think, looks even worse when you consider the fact that only 1.4% of global emissions come from U.S. agriculture. In a lot of ways, best management practices are being used here in the United States to make our agriculture systems the most environmentally friendly in the entire world. And you know what? If the UN's all that interested in global emissions, let them turn their ire to China and India and these countries that seemingly have no environmental regulations. Don't be looking at Americans as if we're part of the problem, but it shows the level of control. And it goes back to what we're seeing in these globalist populist wins around the globe. People don't want this. People don't want some UN bureaucrat telling them where they can live, how they can recreate, what they can eat, how many guns they can have. It's nonsense. More nonsense I want to bring to your attention regarding President Joe Biden's hypocrisy around campaign finance and dark money. This headline we get from the Washington Examiner: Biden-blessed dark money group wired $15 million from Soros while president slammed secret donor world. So you've got Joe Biden out there doing everything he can to say, oh, dark money's bad. We want to clean up dark money. But he's filling out the deposit slips. Actually, you know what? This is legal. It's wrong. It shouldn't be legal, but it is. So maybe this is like the most legal $15 million Joe Biden's ever gotten. A lot of the money they get's not legal. But this money comes from Future Forward USA Action, which is shelling out millions of dollars to bolster the Biden agenda. And this entity tapped ex-Biden White House officials to assist with ad campaign operations, framing Biden as, and I'm quoting directly here, an active and vibrant leader. That's what they're spending their dark money on, to convince you that Joe Biden is an active and vibrant leader. What first comes to mind for me is that you're probably going to need a lot more than $15 million to make the case that Joe Biden is both active and vibrant. Back to the piece. News of more than $15 million from this grant comes as Alex Soros, the 38-year-old son of George Soros, continues to score White House visits and post on social media about his meeting with top Democrat lawmakers. Alex Soros was elected last December as board president of the Open Society Foundation's Future Forward USA Action also pocketed $5.5 million in 2021 to support policy advocacy on Build Back Together legislative packages and a global vaccine campaign. Global vaccines, showing you that Joe Biden is active, $15 million, rich with the hypocrisy of Washington, D.C. Also wanted to share another story with you about our economy, because we all see that while the rate of inflation is decreasing, there is no turn back, right? This base inflation is built in, and so even if the rate of inflation is slowing, the inflation that has already occurred, which is historic and terrible, is now baked into costs for American families. And a report I wanted to flag for you comes from CBS News. Americans need an extra $11,400 today just to afford the basics. The typical American household must spend an additional $11,434 annually just to maintain the same standard of living they enjoyed in January 2021, right before inflation soared to 40-year highs, according to recent government data. Now, this underscores the financial squeeze that many families continue to face. While average hourly pay for workers has increased 13.6% since January of 2021, that lags the 17% increase in inflation during the same period. So we have seen some increase in wages, but it is more than eaten up by this $11,434 bill that the government has essentially imposed on your family just to live the exact same standard of living. So the result is that most people don't have that $11,400 extra. We've chronicled before on this program that more than 60% of the country right now is living paycheck to paycheck. In this past week, the United States government just had to go sell, billions of dollars in additional bonds. That's going to drive up the APR on credit cards that people are using to bridge from one month to the next. And who's getting hit worse? Well, according to the CBS piece, inflation takes a bigger bite out of low-income households because by necessity, they spend a bigger share of their income on basics than higher-income Americans. So it's regular folks, it's hardworking Americans who are paying the price for this reckless inflation. I want to go to some military news now. As you guys know, I'm on the House Armed Services Committee, and what impacts our service members is of deep, deep importance to me. And we got a report from Breitbart that I want to bring to your attention. Matt Gaetz demands Air Force reveal who told airmen not to attend a conservative rally in North Dakota. So this comes out of the Minot Air Force Base, right? And some bird brain at DOD thought it was a good idea to warn service members who were stationed there not to attend a rally hosted by Turning Point Action. And part of the message says, please remind them that participation with groups such as Turning Point Action could jeopardize their continued service in the U.S. military. This is incredible. Our own military leaders telling service members that Turning Point is some sort of right-wing entity? Give me a break. So we've demanded answers. We've sent a request to the Secretary of the Air Force to identify exactly who approved this crazy text message. And once we get that information, we are going to call those people before the Military Personnel Subcommittee, and we're going to sit them right next to the folks from Turning Point, and we're going to ask, what is it about these folks that you think is alt-right and extreme and dangerous for service members? And keep in mind, this is the military that had no problem being a drag show, performance, theater, entity before we brought accountability to bear on that question. So a lot more to come on that. I just received a letter back from the Secretary of the Air Force that they're working on our request to identify who did this, and we're going to bring them forward. We're going to ask them tough questions. And you know what? That's what it takes sometimes to deter this kind of crap. You have to identify it, you have to expose it, and then you have to impose a consequence for the people who thought this was okay, because it's all part of a grand scheme to try to turn our military leftward, and that is just not what our military is supposed to be. And I'm not trying to make the military some vassal state of the political right. I want our military to be apolitical. I want them to ensure that we have the most survivability, lethality, and capability in the world, that we can vanquish any foe when necessary, but that we don't have to overutilize, and we don't have to turn the military into some sort of social justice experiment. There's going to be, in just moments, debate and vote on the expulsion of George Santos. I will be voting against expelling George Santos. I will be debating against it. We will bring you that floor action, hopefully in our episode tomorrow, if we have the opportunity to put that together for you. Also, there are major developments right now regarding UAP disclosure and transparency. We're negotiating the finer points of the National Defense Authorization Act, and I'm working real hard right alongside fellow Firebrands, Ana Paulino Luna and Tim Burchett, who you've gotten to know through this program. We're really building out a case for just getting this out of the silo of the intelligence community and the intelligence committee. We've got to democratize this information, and we've got to do more to get it public. And I will be bringing you updates regarding our progress or lack thereof on that subject. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that everyone has a great time with their family in the upcoming holiday that is upon us, and certainly grateful for your continued viewership and support of Firebrand. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the program, and share it with someone so that we get the truth out more. Thanks for joining us. Roll the credits.